Appreciate Janice Degny, Cooperative Extension, Cortland County, for moderating this session, and also Ryan Aiken, Hemdale Farm, Forrest Watson, Mulligan Farm, and Jason Burrow, Huber Ridge. So yeah, really makes, I think this is one of people's favorite parts about coming to a ag field day or something like that, is the farmer panels. So I'll just cut out mine.
Should we go ahead and jump right in, Joe?
Yeah, you guys can go ahead, jump right in.
Okay, well, we have 3 panelists today, and we're going to start with Forrest Watson. And first, I'd like each of you just to give a background and overview, introduce yourself and background and overview of the farm.
Okay, so my name is Forrest Watson. I've been working on our family farm here in Avon, New York for almost 14 years now. We're a dairy farm milking just over 1,300 cows right now. We're farming about 2,800 acres and cover cropping after corn silage on 100% of that. So we've been working on soil health for a number of years now, and have gotten a number of things under our belt, and we're really enjoying the process.
Thank you, Forrest. Ryan, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Ryan Aiken, and I work for Hemdale Farms. We're located in Seneca Castle, New York. So in the Finger Lakes region, we're a 1,400 cow dairy, as well as a 20 million greenhouse plant operation and vegetable farm. So we're a very diverse business. We extensively use cover crops wherever we can, including multi-species, interseeding, cereal grain species. The crops we grow: corn for silage, some grain, alfalfa, wheat, cabbage, snap beans, squash, pumpkins are the crops that we grow. In tillage-wise, since 2010, we have been pretty much strip till, conservation till, no real no-till, but other than this year, we tried about 8 acres of it in an alfalfa seeding. So that's, I guess, pretty much our farm in a nutshell.
It's a nice picture to end on, Joe. Jason, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Jason Burrows, Aurora Ridge Dairy and Dugan Farms. We have dairy. We milk 2,400 cows here at the home farm, and actually another 2,000 at another location. And farm about 5,000 acres of, primarily corn, alfalfa, grass hays, barley, wheat, snap beans, in varying different types of rotations. But the primary one I'll talk about is the corn and the hay, which is 4 years hay, 4 years corn. We've experimented with different cover crops probably over the last 20 years. In the last 5, off and on, quite a bit of interseeding. Done anything from tillage radish, annual ryegrass, cereal rye, wheat, oats, basically whatever I can get my hands on. Some varying success, some major failures. Our primary tillage right now, we're not all no-till, we're not all conservation tillage, but this year I have about 200 acres of strictly no-till. Probably another 40 or 50 of strip till, and the rest is basically, I call it minimum till, but where we come in with a speed tiller and hit it once and then hit it with a column mulcher and plant. So I would say the biggest reasons for the cover crops is for erosion control and nutrient retention.
Joseph has a beautiful picture of your huge daikon radish up. It looks great.
Yeah, that's some of our early interseeding. Actually, that's my daughter holding the biggest radish she could find. So
that's great. Okay, so we have a mix of tillage across the farms. Let's spend a little more time talking about your rotation and the tillage you use, maybe with some details, maybe your machinery and maybe adjustments you've had to make to the machinery over time or the cropping system over time. So we'll go back to you, Forrest, and
Okay.
so tillage and crop establishment.
Yeah, we are now planting probably 80% of our corn no-till. We kind of were moving in that direction slowly over the last few years, and last year with the very late planting and high biomass cover crops we were really thrown into that full force, and we no-tilled 100% of the acres last year, and that worked out pretty well for us. This year we strip tilled a few acres of fields that we knew had a wet history, compaction issues, and a poor cover crop established. So we knew we needed to do something there. But overall, we've been very happy with the no-till results. We do some strip tillage with an Unverferth zone builder, and but we aren't putting any fertilizer down with that anymore. So we really only run it if we need a compaction release.
How deep do you tend to run that?
Well, they always say you're supposed to be 2 inches under your compaction layer, but that can sometimes be unreachable. So maybe anywhere from 8 to 12 inches if we're going to run it. Our planter has gotten simplified over the years, I guess, in attachment, as far as attachments go. We're pretty much just residue managing wheels, seed blades, and closing wheels. We don't run a no-till coulter anymore. We just got hydraulic downforce, which was a really huge improvement. Other than that, for our hay seedings, we try and do as minimum tillage as possible. We apply a lot of our manure with a drag hose and an airway. So that's kind of our tillage in a lot of senses. So for our hay seedings, right after wheat, we'll just put manure on with the airway and then go over it once with a cultimulcher to kind of smooth out wheel tracks or whatever and drill the seeding. So yeah, we've really been working toward being all no-till if possible, and cover crops have been a major player in that, being able to make that happen.
Ryan, do you want to talk about your tillage and machinery?
Sure. We started using deep tillage with an Unverferth zone builder probably 15 years ago, primarily to alleviate compaction, just like Forrest said. Run it at the same depth, 8 to 12 inches. We check. We're always checking with penetrometers, our own homemade penetrometers, to try to see where that compaction was and try to get down to it and alleviate it. And as that time went on, we're not finding those compaction layers hardly at all anymore. We're starting to back away from using that. We would mostly normally do that in the fall, and we're starting to back away from that a lot more, especially as we've started interseeding cover crops. In 2010, we set up an Unverferth to put down fertilizer and create strips, and we ran that up until about 3 years ago, and that was our primary tillage for planting corn. It also ran before we planted cabbage and before we planted the snap beans and the squash and pumpkins, and in many cases was the only pass. Since then, we went to a Gladiator, which is a Kraus implement, which does a little better job, a finer seed bed, and that again is really 8 inches is as deep as we go with that. We also use, in cases where we need it, an interceptor. Got that this year. It's sort of like a speed till, turbo till. The interceptor is the brand that we use. use. And that is more of a, if it's kind of lumpy when we run the Gladiator, the Interceptor will run to make a little better seed bed. But all in all, it's still really vertical tillage. We're not we're not mixing all the dirt like you would with a field cultivator or chisel plow or anything like that. Like I said in my introduction, we have not done any no-till. It's interesting to us, but it's not something, I guess, with our crop rotations and our weather patterns and everything, it's something that we've stayed away from to do straight no-till. So,
What about your manure practices? Are you drag hosing all the manure?
No drag hose. Currently, it's all broadcast surface applied. For years, we would run an airway in the spring ahead of the manure application so that would soak in faster and dry faster. We're really looking hard at injection. In fact, we had an injector ordered from a vendor, and he's so particular that he didn't like how things were coming together, and we still haven't got it. We're supposed to have it in March, but our land is spread out enough that the drag hose has never been a good option for us. But injection with neighbor issues and nutrient conservation and things, that's where the direction we will go. So, and one thing I would point out with all the strip tillage that we do, and including the manure injection that we'd like to do, auto steer guidance, RTK guidance is really what made all this possible, so that we put fertilizer down with the Gladiator and then plant right over top of that. And without our RTK guidance, I don't think that would be quite as possible for us.
Thanks, Ryan. Jason, on to you.
Okay. So it seems like we've tried just a little bit of everything over the years. I'll start with the strip tillage. We did a lot of that probably, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago with a Remlinger toolbar, which back in that time, that was kind of the one to go by. We walked away from that. We had some failures with that system, mainly in wet years on our soils. We're a little on the heavy side, but not bad. Mostly honey oil soils here. We've dabbled in no-till, and we've tried everything with full-blown no-till coulters on the planter, row cleaners, different closing wheels, and kind of come back to stripped all that stuff off, and now all I have is row cleaners and basically the seed discs and a Schaffer zipper closing wheel. We've taken certain farms and just tried to figure out the system. I mean, I think the biggest problem we've had is manure application. Most all of our manure we've been trying to drag line that, which I think has helped tremendously with soil health and compaction. But, in order to hold the rates that we need to put on for matching the growing a crop, we really feel like we need to incorporate that manure. So, it's struggled a little bit with trying to find the right tool to incorporate the manure, but have minimum disturbance with the soil. We've tried anything from a pottinger, which disturbs a lot of the soil on the surface, but doesn't go very deep, to Dietrich injectors. We've used Brilliant injectors. Last few years we purchased a Bazooka Farm Star coulter till, which actually does a pretty nice job with the cover crops with incorporating the say 12,000 gallons to the acre. The no-till ground that we've done, I've kind of treated that with white gloves. A lot of that has been surface applied at lower rates, just to try to not have the soil disturbance. Generally, over most all of our ground, though, the majority of it right now is we've got a K-line speed tiller, very similar to a Dagelman or a Pottinger, and that works pretty nice. After the dragline application, just smoothing, leveling the ground, and we're running that probably anywhere from 4 to 6 inches, and then, like I said before, pitting with column mulcher and planting it. That's been kind of our go-to plan the last few years. And I'm just going to continually try to experiment with the no-till and see if we can't find something there that could work, across all the acres. But that's kind of where we're at today.
Thank you. Well, let's switch gears a little and talk about your cover crop practices. So tell us a little bit about maybe the species you select and if you think the cover crop has helped your tillage systems work better and why that would be. Things like that.
Yeah. So ours, usually I'll put together for the last few years is like a 5 or 6 way cover crop mix for most of our corn silage acres, which is comprised of usually fairly heavy on cereal grains, rye or triticale, and then crimson clover and Austrian winter peas have been really good ones for us for planting date. We can get it drilled right after our forage harvester comes through and get pretty good emergence and establishment with those species. Radishes we've done some with, and some years if you get it planted early they're great, other years they don't do a whole lot. So this year we're switching to more of a kale type of brassica, and we used annual ryegrass for a few years, and I think that helped us along with our compaction issues, but it seemed to, even though it appeared it was controlled, we ended up having quite a bit of it in our wheat from year to year, and our hay seeding, so we are moving away from that one. But definitely there's a big correlation between your success with a cover crop and being able to go into that field and no-till or not, and just the soil structure that we've seen from good cover crop practices really promotes being able to harvest easily, leaving the fields in good shape, and applying manure without trouble, and making ruts and tracks, and all that goes toward being able to just go in with a planter and have a successful corn stand. So we have not been interseeding. We did try it one year, and we're pretty disappointed with the results from lack of sunlight is what we kind of determined that it was the cause, because wherever we had a skip or the applicator drove over the corn, the cover crop was fantastic. Where it wasn't, where it was heavy, good stand of corn, we had virtually no cover crop. So instead of trying to make that work for year after year, we decided we know what we're going to get with a drill behind the corn chopper, and we're going to just go that route, even if we have to adjust our species a little for a later establishment. But definitely we can, if we have a really good cover crop, then that's much more mellow ground to plant into.
Do you ever harvest your cover crops in the spring? Spring forage?
We have. Usually it has to be planned ahead of time and planted at a much higher seeding rate, and we'll probably would more likely do just triticale for that, and seeded it like 3 bushel to the acre. So if we can get the seed and we get it in time and everything, that can be an option. But usually with our cover crop mix, we're at a low enough rate that it doesn't produce enough biomass to warrant harvesting in the time frame.
Okay, thank you, Forrest. Ryan, on to you.
Yeah, so cover cropping historically at Hemdale Farms is a practice that goes back to the owner's father. I mean, the 50s or 60s maybe. I mean, always has been a cereal rye, cereal wheat, oats, that sort of thing. We would start with oats as soon as the first cabbage fields came off, and then go into wheat as the fall came following corn silage, and rye if it was later. The place that we always felt like we were missing an opportunity was late cabbage. We have cabbage that's harvested right up till Thanksgiving. And we were really excited to try some interseeding in that operation in the last few years, and very mixed results. We had annual ryegrass that pretty much took over some of the cabbage because the cabbage just never really canopies like corn would. And we weren't sure if we had cabbage out there or grass hay fields, but still trying some of that. We have been interseeding in corn. This is our third year interseeding in corn, and similar results to what Forrest mentioned as far as you chop the corn and it's real spotty as to what's there, but usually as the fall goes on, it greens up, and by spring it's very green, and it, we've been much more pleased with the corn silage than in the cabbage at this point. As far as seeding those cover crops, the cereals following a harvest were done by broadcasting, and then we would run that zone builder pulling an airway to do our fall tillage, compaction alleviation, but also incorporating the seeds. The interseeding, we've hired someone to come in the last 3 years, and they have a drill, 12-row drill interseeder, kind of John Walls showed earlier. So, yeah, that's pretty much our cover crop program.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jason? Your cover
So,
crop practices?
Yeah, so our cover crop practice kind of been all across the board. 5 or 6 years ago, we hired Jim Hershey and Brian Zimmerman from down in Pennsylvania to come up with their interseeder and do a bunch for us. Actually, early on, we had some really good luck with doing it with radish and manure ryegrass. There were also years where the corn didn't yield as well. So I think the sunlight got in there and the cover crop was able to get established. The last 2 years we had tried it. We had really good corn yields and not much cover crop. So, this year we didn't do any interseeding. Probably going to drill it after corn silage comes off, or broadcast it and come back with a column mulcher or a turbo disc and incorporate it, which we've had pretty good luck doing that. Never have had a failure drilling a cover crop in after corn silage, unless it's just plain too late in the season. That was the case last year. The other thing is with the cover crop and interseeding, we played around with different chemical programs. We tried the Vertic and Outlook program. We had a situation where we got a lot of heavy rain after the herbicide was put on, had some crop damage. We walked away from that, went back to more of an Acuron program and atrazine, or what used to be traditionally Lumax. Truthfully, I think my favorite cover crop was the annual ryegrass, mostly because of the root development and compaction alleviation. But you've got to kill it really early in the spring before it gets away from you. So, we were pretty aggressive about getting it killed in the spring. And you do see some of that around the fields, but nothing that's been a problem. This year we're going to try cereal rye. I've got a line on some, actually we're combining it today. Hopefully get that in the bin for seed for this fall.
So for the annual ryegrass, sorry. I'm sorry, I thought you finished. No, I was going to ask for your annual ryegrass, what's your control approach in the spring?
We just would get on the fields or as early as we possibly could in the spring, just as soon as it started greening up, and we'd kill it with, Roundup or generic Roundup. 24 ounces seemed to do it. If you let it go too long, and then it was more of a problem.
It gets too big.
Yeah.
It's that balance between the amount of biomass you want and being able to get the weed control you want, right?
That's kind of what we found.
Yeah. The other thing, what about, when you're trying to go early and the weather is cold like this spring, have you noticed problems controlling it when it's, I know the daytime temperatures are 50 or less.
Yeah, so not so much this last year because actually most of our cover crops didn't grow because they're just put in too late. But last year or the year before, when it was so cold and wet, we got out early, tried to spray as much as we could, didn't get them all done. And then actually what we found, because it was cool, we ended up having to go back a second time and kill some of those cover crops because, you know, the spring dragged out so long. Some of the cover crops, I think, actually germinated in the spring. And where we thought we had them dead, you come back a month later because we were so late, they were greening back up again. So we had some acres we had to hit twice.
Forrest and Ryan, have you had issues with controlling cover crops in the spring? Or do you have something that's really good for killing the cover crops in the spring?
You want me to go?
Go ahead, Forrest. Go ahead.
As I said about the ryegrass, I mean, that was, you know, one of the ones we've had some issues with, and it's not as much a, you know, it appeared like it killed it and we didn't have weed pressure throughout the season. It's more like it would maybe go to seed at some point that we, you know, one spot that we missed, and I'm not totally sure because it would just be a kind of an ongoing problem in later crop rotations more than the season that we were planting into. Because typically we have been planting green if possible, and we have gotten a fairly good kill on the cover crop. We did use Sharpen at one point. We've tried to go to some things that were a little cheaper. We've done some dual, and that's been successful as long as it rained at the right time. We had some resprays this year due to just lack of rain in the time period that needed it for the residual. But we haven't had too much issue spraying it. Timing, we actually hire somebody to do our spraying, and he's pretty dutiful to be here when we need him. So that's very helpful.
I would echo what Jason said about the timeliness of killing the ryegrass. First year we had some interseeding. We weren't as on top of trying to get out there to kill it, and it got very large, and then it made it difficult to have the ground ready to plant. Those areas where that would be where our row would be that year, and it kept moisture in the soil, and it just kind of drug things out longer. This year we watched the hourly temperature dutifully, and if it was going to be 50, we were out there spraying in April or early April. And the other thing, we upped the rate of that generic glyphosate to 40, almost to some cases 48 ounces. We just wanted to put on a lot of it to try to make sure we were going to get it killed. And even then, there's cases where I think what we found was if we were timely about planting, like this year was much more timely than last year. It was a little easier to keep it under control. Last year, we had it killed, or thought we had it killed, but we were a whole month before we were getting in there to plant, and it was growing right back again and creating more issues. So we've reduced our seeding rate too for when we use ryegrass. We were doing like 13 pounds of that and a few pounds of radish, and we've backed that down to like 8 or 9 pounds of annual ryegrass to try to keep that. Also saw the same thing that Forrest mentioned about it coming up in volunteer in a wheat crop this year. I had 6 acres of wheat that was half wheat and half annual ryegrass. So that was planted 2 years ago, the annual ryegrass was, so really not sure, like you said, if it was reseeded itself or seed that just laid there and waited to germinate. But the other thing I was going to mention on herbicides for corn production, we're somewhat limited with the cabbage in our rotation. So I think you guys were mentioning the Sharpen and the Acuron and all that. We don't have any of those. We're not using any of those. We're just a glyphosate, atrazine, and Resolve Q. And so that has also, I think, led had more opportunities for us for interseeding because there's much less chance of issues with the cover crops, with those more simple herbicides.
Thank you. Ryan, or excuse me, Forrest mentioned planting green. So I want to ask each of you if you're doing any planting green, and how big is the cover crop that you shoot for when you go in green, and then your follow-up control of the cover crop. I guess Forrest, we'll start with you.
So for the last 3 years, we've been trying to plant as much green as possible, which definitely kind of poses an issue if you're trying to go through with a strip tiller first, which is some of the reason we've backed off from that. Is just, you know, with just the planter going through, you can get through a lot more residue much more easily instead of kind of balling it up with a strip tiller beforehand. If it's high biomass. Last year we had extremely tall cover crops because we were planting, you know, weeks later than normal. Some of them were close to 4 feet high probably, and which was a management issue in itself because we tried to roll some of them down after we planted and didn't really have the correct equipment for all that, but it worked out all right. This year we planted probably 70 to 80% of our corn acres green. The acres that were not was either hay fields that we killed off in the spring earlier, or acres that we still had to put manure on before, or we had not put manure on before the cover crop got to the point that it wouldn't pop back up after we drove over it. So we try and predict, you know, which fields we're gonna still be putting manure on when the cover crop is basically the cereal grains are elongating their stems. Because once you mat that down with our airway and put a bunch of manure on there, that poses a huge problem to try and plant through because it stays flat and doesn't dry out. So those acres we try and kill earlier. Otherwise, we plant green as much as possible, and we're not really shooting for a particular height. It's just kind of whenever we get to that field, and then we'll plant it, and we'll do a post-planting pre-emerge herbicide on that.
Like a Roundup something, a Roundup Acron.
Yeah, Roundup with the, we try and do it in one pass, so we're putting a little residual down, not enough to hinder the cover crop planting for that following fall, but enough to keep the grasses and weeds at bay, but until the canopy's there.
Do you think that planting green impacted negatively because of our dry growing season? Or do you think it sucked more moisture out of the soil early?
I've seen that. I've seen that happen, but we're typically once the corn's planted, we're trying to get that sprayed off within a day or two. So there's no competition for moisture. It's more, you know, if you already have super dry conditions, then yes, spraying it early is going to be better. If you've got enough moisture or you're trying to dry the ground out, having that living crop there is very, very handy. So no, we didn't see, this year we did not see any impact of lack of moisture from the cover crop, but we still had relatively good moisture when we were planting, and then killed that cover crop as soon as we planted the field. So it seemed to work out well this year.
Good. It's a lot to balance, and there's so many unpredictables.
Very much. So.
Yeah. Ryan, have you guys played with planting green at all?
No, we have not. We had a field last year we thought we were going to try, and it just kept raining, and then next thing we knew, the rye was headed out, so we weren't gonna try that. I do have a question though for Forrest on that, on planting green. How do you adjust your nitrogen supply when you have such a, or don't you, when you have such a large biomass there that's got to break down throughout the summer? Do you add extra nitrogen for that, or?
Yes and no. We're putting down basically the same rate, about 30 pounds with the planter, and then an additional 10 pounds or so with the herbicide application. So that's more of a blanket treatment on the crop that's trying to break down. And so that seems to help. The starter with the planter is banded 2x2. And the way I figure that is, we're not really counting a lot of the nitrogen that the sprayer puts on, just because I figure that's going to be probably tied up for a good few weeks anyway. So the 2x2, we're hoping that's kind of there where you need it. It also helps once you get the system of cover crops growing in for consecutive years. It may take it up, and for those first 2 to 3 years, definitely going to have to put more fertilizer up front to counteract that take up of them. But once you kind of get that system going, you constantly have the breakdown of the previous year's cover crop to aid that initial need up front.
Thanks, Forrest. Jason, have you guys done any planting green?
Very little. Tried it probably 3 or 4 years ago and failed miserably. And of course, it was on a field near one of the main roads, so none of the neighbors let me live it down. So we haven't done much with it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so kind of moving towards wrap up and summary, what kind of changes do you guys feel like the tillage practices and your cover crop practices have done to help improve the soil health? What do so what are those things that you see in practice in your soils?
For us, I think the major items are just cutting way back on erosion. That's a huge one. Structure of our soil, we're able to, after an inch of rain, we can be chopping corn again within a day, and it's like you got 0.2 of an inch. I mean, it's such a difference in the stability of the soil. We're not making ruts anywhere. So that's just huge. And nutrient management, we really feel good about putting manure down in the fall on a green cover crop rather than brown soil that's trying to erode, or there's a crop there to take up some of that nutrients, which you would otherwise not be able to really count for much in the spring.
Get up and hold it.
So those are kind of the big items for us. I mean, increasing organic matter is a great idea. It's just it's as we all know, slow to take effect, which it does. You do see it over time, but it's not like that isn't a more a quick to see, quick acting item.
Do you feel like it's impacted yields positively?
I think we've probably gone both ways at times. This year, it seems like we've got everything just seemed to kind of work out really well. And I think we're maybe on year 4 or 5 of having like a cover crop on everything. And I would like to say that's paying off, especially in this dry weather. I think, we had very minimal curling, and everything just seems to be looking really good. But in the first couple of years, we've definitely, it was like, well, maybe we would have had a better corn crop if we hadn't sprayed the cover crop late, or all of those things where you kind of learn as you go about what you should have done. Maybe putting more fertilizer up front to counteract that take up from the cover crop, or the dry weather, or whatever it is. And hindsight's always 20/20 on all that stuff, but I think that we are benefiting, yes.
Thank you. Ryan, since you have 40 or 50 years of cover crop benefits, might be harder to notice, right?
Well, I should back up a little. During that 40 to 50 years, the farm was very heavily involved in processing vegetables, snap beans, beets, carrots, and those took a heavy toll on the soil health. And so we stopped growing beets in about 2005, and the snap beans are from 900 acres down to 40 acres this year. So we backed away from all those heavy, abusers of soil, we like to call it. I think the biggest benefit we've seen is going to using the zone builder to alleviate compaction. And then with the use of our RTK guidance, we're planting, basically the row moves 15 inches every year. So it's here one year and it's 15 inches over the next, and then it's back and forth. And the stability of the ground, just like Forrest said, we are out with trucks in the field after a rainstorm several days before many of our neighbors, and not bringing mud out into the road like our neighbors are. And that I attribute to that reduction of tillage and the ability to, we kind of think of it as like there's soil pillars that we're standing on, because we're not disturbing, that 15 inches between the rows ever. And then the use of the cover crops, we're finding now, especially with the ryegrass, that some of the fields that we've used that on for several years, we're not even needing to run the deep till or the strip tiller in the spring. The ground is just that much more, soft and plantable. And I don't know, I can't say if if we've seen a huge improvement in yield, but we certainly have seen a huge improvement in equipment costs, labor, fuel, to go from 2 to 3 passes on it to plant a crop to 1 pass, maybe 2. So
I just want to clarify about the soil types you guys are working on. How would you characterize your soils, Ryan?
So we have a wide variety. Our farm is kind of a very narrow north to south. We have sandy loam soils, clay loam soils, gravelly stuff. In it, we can be planting cabbage on the north end of the farm in middle of April, and there's cornfields that aren't ready to plant till the end of May. It's really ebbs and flows with the soil types.
And Forrest, how would you characterize your soils?
We're really in the same boat. We got just a little of everything. And, people say that you have to have such a thing to cover crop and no-till on, and that's not really true. It works on everything. It's just a matter of managing it. You've got to manage on different levels for every field. And that's the biggest thing of switching to no-till, really, is you're spending less time in tillage equipment, and you're spending more time identifying what a field needs, or the timing of doing some operation on that field. But yeah, we've really got every type of soil, and we've got stuff that takes forever to drain and some that's sand. So as we all know, drainage tile benefits every type of farming operation, but we've really, with the cover crops and everything, that just seems to pay off even more. It just makes every field that much better. So that we've done quite a bit of tiling as well.
Thank you. Jason, you mentioned you have some heavier soils and then some honey oil soil.
Yeah, I mean, primarily we're honey oil lima here. There's a difference in the honey oil lima from east to west. You know, the closer you get to Cuba Lake, there's more clay in it, but it's still classified as honey oil. The further we get east away from Cuba Lake, you know, it's a little deeper. It's less clay underneath, and it's just, I think it's a different soil. There again, you know, the thing we've found has made the biggest improvement on all of it is grid tiling. So we started doing that, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, just trying to take so many acres every year and just take the wettest farms and grid tile them. That's been huge. It's taken farms that would be the last farm you'd ever plant to, you know, one of the first ones you can get on in the spring. You know, and probably back up to your question about the cover crops and the soil health. You know, I've seen a huge, huge difference here over the last 25 years. You know, I can remember years where we just beat over some of this ground, you know, 2 or 3 times with a column mulcher, trying to get the clods beat down small enough to plant it. You know, with the cover crops we've done, the change in tillage, the change in how we apply manure, we just don't do that anymore. You know, you hit it once. Some fields you get hit once and plant it. It's beautiful. You know, certainly the ground, I'll echo these other 2 guys that we've done minimum tillage or strip till or no till. You know, those fields, the water holding capacity or how firm the soil is after rain is quite eye opening. You know, you can get in there, get on it, chop it, get out of there. When other fields that we've done some more tillage on, you got to wait another day or so just because you're going to be stuck in the mud. So overall, I'd say it's been a good thing. What's that, Janice?
I said that seems like a huge benefit. The water management benefits.
It is huge. Hard to put a price on that. So
Joe, are there any questions in the chat box for the?
Yeah, there's one question, and I guess I'll just use this opportunity to ask the attendees if you have any questions for the farmer panels. The wealth of information here. The one question was, this was for Forrest, what was the reason to switch from radishes to kale? I think I missed a bit of audio there. Yeah, and thanks for the forum, so she appreciates it.
Yeah, the reason that we haven't actually planted any kale yet, but I like having a brassica in our cover crop mix. A lot of I like the wide big leaf spread for quick soil coverage in the fall before the grains are growing very much. And we have been trying to use radishes, and we don't seem to get great growth on them in the fall. So I'm looking for another brassica basically that will do a little bit better in cool temperatures late planting. And they say there's a kale rape hybrid that's called Bayou, and that's the one I've seen it in a cover crop plot before. It seemed to be very vibrant and a lot of foliage in more compared to other brassicas. It was large, bigger growth and quick growth. So I'm hoping that can do a little bit better for our falls, and I think it will last a little bit longer into the winter than radishes as well. That's what they've been telling me.
I have a question just from my curiosity, since you guys are all dairy farms. Have you ever experimented with alternative forage crops like BMR, sorghum, Sudan grass, or different things that, if in a dry year, have you ever thought of trying something like that?
We have planted sorghum a couple times now on fields that we were either had a poor corn stand on because of wet conditions, or this year we surprisingly had a wet field that we could not plant corn in the time frame, so we planted sorghum there. But I think it's a BMR sorghum, So it's not really a sort of Sudan grass, a little bit different, but it seems to work decently well.
Last year we had a lot of unplanted corn ground. We planted BMR, it was a Sudan grass, and we planted some other annual ryegrass clover with it. Thought we might try to harvest it by the fall. It just kept getting taller and taller and taller and taller and taller and taller and not drying out. And it was like November and we got a foot of snow and it all went flat. So we didn't harvest it. We did harvest oats. We planted some oats as a cover crop one year. We harvested some oats, did some triticale, but nothing real extensive with alternative forage crops.
Kind of the same here. We never have done any sorghum. Threatened to do it a few times when we've gotten scared about tonnage, but never pulled the trigger on it. I did do oats one year. We no-tilled that in after wheat, and got quite a bit of tonnage off from it. The quality, when we could get on the ground to harvest it, wasn't the best we've had at the heifers. But yeah, not a lot of experience with it.
Yeah, as far as, I mean, if we could plant a short season corn, we typically prefer to do that just because we're trying to grow starch more than fodder, so that the ear is pretty valuable to us.
Awesome. Thanks so much for those answers. I'm not seeing any more questions. Maybe it's because you guys all did a great job in covering the bases. Here we go. We have one from Greg Albrecht. For Forrest, when do you commonly have your CC mixes in after corn silage harvest? At a certain date, do you switch to a hardy small grain?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, of course, it always depends on when we're harvesting corn silage. We're typically trying to be, the drill hopefully enters the field the day of or the day after the chopper leaves it. But that, of course, still depends on harvest date. And it's always a little bit hard to predict because we're in the process right now of ordering what cover crop mix seeds we want. So you kind of have to figure, okay, we're going to try and do this many acres of a mix that costs more and get that in at a certain time. And then, yes, if we've done any grain corn, we'll typically switch to like just rye, straight cereal rye or triticale for that. And just cut the cost back because we know we're not going to get quite as much growth out of the more expensive species. I mean, I would say, at the end of October, I wouldn't try and plant much of our more expensive cover crop mix after the end of October. Basically, I guess a good rule of thumb would be if you're planting wheat for grain, it's kind of the same thing. Like if you're planting that really late, you're not going to get much of a crop of that either. So similar timing to a cover crop mix, I guess, for us. If we're not going to plant wheat anymore, then probably not going to plant cover crop mix either. We'll switch to something cheaper.
I want to thank the three of you. I think that was a great discussion with a ton of good information. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to second that. Thank you so much for taking the time. Wealth of information. I think a lot of people got a lot out of it, even though, we have maybe one more question. I guess people are targeting Forrest. Forrest, what is the seeding rate for your cereal rye and other winter grain, or for a mix? Maybe that's a lot of information, but maybe an example of a mix if you had seeding rates off the top of your head. But
so the mix we put together is usually around 47 to 50 pounds an acre. I guess that's probably targeted rate mostly to keep the cost where we want it. And I mean, really the right thing, I can't give you off the top of my head right now, but seeds per acre is probably a better number to go by as far as mixes go. Because like clover or something is pretty small seed. But and then if we're going to something like bin run wheat or rye or something, we'd probably go to more like 100 pounds an acre. Especially because that would be planted later as well. So it's not going to tiller or get as much ground cover. So we'll up the rate for that.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for taking the time.